Hello everyone, welcome to the Week 10 lecture for EMS207 2024-30 session. So we're going to start orienting you to the final assessment task more firmly here. I also want to start by going through some computational thinking ideas and some key resources in particular that will help you introduce computational thinking in a cost-effective way into your future classrooms. So let's begin. Let's first consider the ways in which computational thinking can influence everyday life. So all of these areas do, as this presentation would indicate, involve a degree of computational thinking or coding, which is where we take a broad phenomenon and break it down into its composite parts and look at how those parts interact. So obviously things like neuroscience, ranging from the early days of examining brain injuries now through full neurological mapping, can see which parts of the brain are responsible for which facets of human existence. Things like engineering as well, where certain structures, cross beams and things like that tend to be a little bit stronger. Mathematics and economics is a big one. Obviously, things the Reserve Bank increasing the interest rate to incentivise people to put more money in the bank for higher returns, and of course creating high interest repayments on mortgage to give people less money to spend. So there's less increase in prices across the economy. So all these areas, even things like sports now, where they look at mapping how often, to what intensity players are moving, how much they're moving, and tracking that with the rates of injury and rest cycles. So all of this is now heavily, the data for these areas is now largely digitised and very easy to gather. And so there's a big sense of moving away from gut instinct into proper computational thinking and analysis of all these different areas of our lives. So what is it? Well, I've been through this. You can check it out if you want this. This video provides a really nice definition. And there are some great websites that go into further depth here that I might just signal to. I'll come to this one. There is a nice introduction here if you'd like to check it out. I mean, this course does cost money. There are some free resources here that you can look at, particularly around grade of 3 to 5 could be quite helpful on the ISTE site, that start introducing things like Python programming and things like that as well if you want to run at the coding club in your school. Google does also offer some nice resources that you can see here. They've got things around AI starting to emerge as well, computer science, lesson plans and activities pre-created. And so we talked last week about some of the key skills that students would need to develop with regard to digital literacy, understanding digital systems and safety and those sorts of things. So it would be useful to maybe consider signing up to some of these aspects as well. And we also have this computational thinking guide that but mostly introduces the concepts through Lego and Meccano and things like that as well. This WeDo tool is quite useful. It comes with an app that uses kind of the puzzle piece design or interface that we see with a lot of the other apps that I'll show you through today as well. But you will see even with things like STEM as a broad concept, it generally returns back to computational thinking, which is that idea of decomposing something, abstracting or predicting relationships and how they'll work in the future. So thinking out beyond the current state, thinking algorithmically, coming up with steps, rules, codes, and then evaluating and generalizing those and seeing what the weaknesses are. So there's some really nice step-through guides in this particular space. So you could use these as planning frameworks, and you can do this with the digital and non-digital work as well. So lots of resources here. It is connected, I think it's to the British curriculum, but you can still make the judgments yourself, of course. But we'll move off that because I don't want to spend too much time on this because I know these lectures can get a bit too much at times. So we will proceed forward. So the definition remains at its core, decomposition, breaking a problem or concept down into parts or steps, looking for patterns, recognising and using these to recognise or find trends. I mean, in professional basketball, which I do thoroughly enjoy watching, there are entire websites that break down patterns, which players perform better and worse together, which players struggle the most defensively, which players reduce other players' percentage of scores around the rim, things of that nature. And coaches can now use that to make judgments as to how to put their lineups on the floor and things like that. We then, once we recognise patterns, we then hit a point of abstraction where we develop instructions or rules to solve a problem or complete a task. And then we design an algorithm generally, which tends to provide, we generalise these and provide guidance for future work in the space that of course can be iterated upon and improved. You can add variables and variants to our thinking, but it does kind of go all the way up from things like writing a procedure into more extended HTML coding or Python or CC cascading style sheets or something like that. There are definitions here through NISA as well, if you'd like to have a look at those, although I have gone through those extensively as well. We've talked about computational thinking. Design thinking is the next step where we kind of apply those algorithms and rules to solve a specific problem. I mean, we've been through scientific thinking a lot as well. It's essentially the scientific method where we pose questions, investigate the questions through a method that's replicable, get our results and then communicate them. And then systems thinking is really about the interactions between things in a system as well. So they do overlap a lot. I won't go through them now fully because these lectures do tend to get a bit lengthy, but the resources are there if you'd like to. So we've been dabbling around here a lot in the highly theoretical space, and you're probably sick of hearing things like decomposition, pattern recognition and stuff like that. So let's step into the space of resources that are available to start playing around with this. It could be in your class on an afternoon. It could be something you do in your own spare time, but there are some really fun free resources out there to start your journey in this space if you haven't done so already. And you can often do these alongside your students. I've spent some time with some of these, not all of them, because it's not possible, no one has the time, but I thought I'd signal to a couple of useful resources I've come across in my time that I think you might find useful. These are all listed on the subsequent pages of the PowerPoint as well. I'll just skip through here. So you can go and find these if you'd like to look at them, but I'll bring them up on my screen for now. So the first one we have up here are B-bots, and B-bots are keeping the digital aspect limited to a sense, and little robots that you program instructions on, and they follow routes. So often B-bots are accompanied with maps. So if we look at the products here, your school may have these, or they may not. But essentially what students are required to do is use this idea of abstraction and pre-code instructions for the B-bots to move around a map. It could be a little town map, it could be essentially a bingo card or something, and the rules typically follow things like 2 spaces forward, 1 space right, 2 spaces forward, 1 space left or something. So it's essentially navigating around a small map, but the students can't physically move it in real time. They have to predict and go, I'll have to go 2 blocks forward, 1 block across, etc., etc. So they're really useful tools if you ever come across them. They're not loading on my computer now for whatever reason, but that's the way it goes. One that I quite like is Scratch, produced by MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and they produce a lot of free online courses too, if you're ever interested in those sorts of things. So Scratch is free. It's web browser based, so if you can get on the internet, you can probably use this. It's a tool to introduce very young students to the idea of coding, and it can be used to design games, it can be used to design animations and a whole host of things, and it works around inputs and outputs. So it takes it to the idea of coding to its most basic level. It does come with a lot of pre-built guides that you can work through, and of course it has sort of this open feature as well if students are particularly gifted in this space or particularly interested, and it allows for the sharing of resources and feedback as well. So there's a whole heap of really interesting features here that could be useful. You can see there are guides for parents and educators and things like that. So I won't go through all of it. Obviously there are things that you can look up in your own time, but we'll just have a quick example of this, I guess. So we do have tutorials and instruction guides here that we can work through. I won't work through this in real time. But I'll just take you through kind of the core features of this. Like most Web 2.0 tools, the really important basic information is on the top bar, and then the left-hand side generally gives the more precise features. So top and left is usually where we want to look at things. But we can see the way it operates is very basic inputs and outputs, and they operate through things like puzzle pieces. So you can see here, these are motions that can be outputs. We have controls in orange, and how frequently things happen. We can have things like operators and more advanced stuff as well. But we might just start with a basic look. So we can ask this thing to say hello for 2 seconds, and we can pop this here with our sprite. We can get it to, I don't know, think for a little bit as well, and we can link those two things together. We can perhaps add a sound to it, but this is where we can actually make music and things like that with this as well. And we have if-then kind of options as well. So it sort of adds that idea of decision making and things like this. We can add kind of a grouping mechanism. So it says when this input occurs, this output will follow in our particular component. So when I click the green icon, it now says hello and thinks for 2 seconds. And I can move that around and do something else. So I could say when the space key is pressed, or the up arrow, or any of the buttons on the keyboard, it will do something else. So I could say the space key will make it ask what is your name, and it will maybe do it forever. That'd be a bit weird, but it will forever ask my name. Actually, that sounds a bit spooky. I don't know if I want to do that, but anyway, we'll try it. So now when I press it, it says what's your name, and we'll continue doing that forever, and I can add that to the mix there as well for my data. So it's essentially just using these little blocks to group actions and responses together. So it is quite useful, and it means that you can analyze fully made products, fully made scratch coding products, and break them down into parts through that computational thinking process that we've talked about. So it's worth looking at the tutorials, and even if you don't know anything about it, you can probably work through it with your students, and you can see lots of opportunities for redirection. We can see X and Y axes. You can add backdrops and all sorts of crazy stuff if you wish to do so. I think you can get them. You can paint them and do all sorts of weird stuff if you want to. There's creepy smiley face. So it's quite an open little tool, and you can add your own kind of, avatars. I think you can add your own. I'm not entirely sure. I haven't spent a lot of... Yeah, you can upload your own as well. So there's a lot of animation work here, similar to really basic PowerPoint as well. And you can have different slides to tell a story or do a comic type of thing if you wish to do so. So this is a really useful one because it doesn't get into that really complex code, behind the scenes Java type of stuff. It focuses on these little blocks with clear instructions. And we can also add our own sounds apparently, which I think is quite cool. Be nice to be able to add my own sounds to the mix. Probably a bit spooky in a sense, but yeah, you can add your own sounds to it as well. So it's really interactive. The student can create pretty much anything they want with their own pictures, sounds, drawings, and stuff like that. So I'd highly recommend this. There is a more junior version that functions in more or less the same way. You can see with the ad there, it's usually creating like little Mario level type of things, and it's just telling them what will happen in a drop and drag interface. Obviously, I don't have an iPad hooked up right now, but this is I think it's free on the App Store. It's for students aged 5 to 7. So if you want to take a really basic overview into your classroom, this can happen, and it does sort of a lot, really basic storytelling, a drop and drag interface. So it functions as a simplified version of what I've just shown you. The next one I'll talk about, there are some other apps as well. It's really hard to keep on top of how many are emerging. So do check some of those out. There are also some websites that teach you about coding and places where you can learn to code. Code Academy is a good one. I did a free one in that to learn how to do some HTML stuff on the Interact2 site, for example, embed videos and things in quite a simple way. You can do that with Khan Academy as well, does some of that work, and MIT OpenCourseWare. MIT OpenCourseWare is really cool because you can go and do, and Massachusetts Institute of Technology is one of the premier institutions in higher education that focuses on STEM in the world. They actually release every couple of years their course materials from years back for free. So you can pretty much search anything. We could say biology, for example, and we can go and learn about that. So if you're interested in learning, like you can see here, someone's done, there's a course here on COVID-19 and the pandemic. So we could sort of look that up and check it out. So it's more than anything else, quite interesting because it just shows you how much information is out there if we want to go and check it out. But you can watch their lectures on YouTube. So we can kind of get expert information on pretty much any topic that interests us, which most universities don't do. So it's a real public service that they're providing here, but that's a side note. So the other one that I think's got some promise, particularly maybe for later primary school, early high school, is the Kodu Game Lab. I mean, my son just walked in while I was setting up on the lecture and wanted to know more about this. Basically, it's a free resource you can download there, and it comes with a suite of classroom resources and lesson plans that let you work with your students to design a 3D game. I would have loved this back in the bad old days. It certainly won't be as robust and as complicated as a AAA gaming experience, but it gives students agency and control, so they can create levels, they can create rules, apples give health, the basic principles of gaming. And it can be a way to bring in that gamification, game design stuff that's quite important. It's a big part of culture now in the digital age. So you can bring in ideas like game design and script writing and all sorts of stuff into coding and computational thinking. If that seems too much for you, well, it may, because you're not being trained to do that. So I wouldn't expect people to do that, but you can actually go and get resources to use this. But what's really useful is if you download this, Kodu, it has the lessons preset to take students through how to design this, and there are different sets of curriculum here. They're not all aligned to the Australian syllabus, so you'd have to kind of really think about which ones you want to use, but you can do things like life science. The more basic one here is probably just using algebra geometry here, so you can create an obstacle course, double the items, showcase creativity, and you can see learn to collect data, analyze it. And if we click on a lesson plan, they're designed to be used in sequence. It'll give you some nice basic information as to how you would go about making this lesson work for you. It has all the resources here as well, available for download, and it typically involves the stuff we've been talking about with project-based learning, critical thinking and coding and those sorts of things. So I guess the long and short, this is a great one. Do keep this around somewhere. You never know. You could be the person that suggests it and seems like a coding whiz, even though you're just learning with the students. A good one to have in the back pocket. The Code Academy website does this as well. This is more learning some stuff here. There's some free courses on learning HTML, for example. So if you really want to get into this, you can. I haven't gone into cascading style sheets or anything like that. I don't have time, but you'll notice these are free courses. And they are starting to introduce ones about AI as well, and Midjourney. So if you want to learn about Midjourney, is the AI that creates the images. So you can use it for things like prompting and working out how to use it effectively, how to use it appropriately. So some really lovely courses there, particularly if you want to get on top of some of the AI stuff. There are non-free courses as well. You don't have to use those, but these could be useful in your development as well. We've got Microsoft Make Code here and Make Bit. So we have lots of different Microsoft variants here. You saw a bit of what we talked about here with the previous one, which was Scratch. And you can see once you start adding multiple sequential outputs and inputs together, you can create the complexity of a game or an animation or something. So you can see this one here. When the game starts, it sets the background, it plays this music, it does this with this character, and so on and so forth with color coding and stuff like that. You can do stuff with Microsoft Education as well, so you can actually start doing some coding on the back end with that, and there are inbuilt lessons. And of course, Minecraft. Did I say Minecraft or Microsoft? That's a useful one there. You can also do the arcade, where you can kind of make retro-style games just with that sort of old controller A-B prompt type thing, like a Nintendo Mini or a Microsoft Bit. These all come with accompanying apps as well. I think the Micro Bit is probably the easiest one to start because it's similar to the level of Scratch. But I'll just give you a sample of that. these are great. The Microsoft ones are great. It's good to see they're providing resources to help with the education in this space, because obviously their companies need this from workers and stuff. So they're obviously self-interest at play, but it still doesn't make the resources any less useful. So you can see people are kind of adding resources to this as well as they go through, dunking music players, all sorts of really cool stuff. There are tutorials. So I'd probably recommend starting with the intro tutorial. I know a couple of years ago a student did this in a tutorial in EMS207, and everyone was extremely impressed. I was too, because I've only just ever fiddled with it mostly. But you can code adventures, make decision trees and stuff like that as well. So there's actually quite a lot in this, and quite a lot of robust learning. But if we just create something like create a project, we'll just call it test. It functions in the same way, except we have this lovely interface to show what will actually happen. So it's perhaps a more sophisticated version. So we can say, okay, let's bring our controller in. We can bring in our sprites. So we can say on start, I don't know if I have any sprites, but we'll just grab one. I don't have one in here actually, but we'll just bring one of these in. I don't have a sprite, but we'll set my sprite. My sprite is going to be this weird smiley face, so it lets you go edit the pixels at a pixel level, which is kind of cool. So this is obviously kind of reminiscent of old-fashioned Mario. This is not a very good character, but you probably get what I'm doing. Done. So now when the game starts, my sprite emerges. It's horrible looking, but that's okay. And then on the then I can bring in the controller stuff. So I could say, okay, when I press the A button, what will happen? I could have movement, logic, all sorts of stuff. I could create a scene. I might just make it move. So when I press A, I don't know, get it to move or something. I don't know. I'll have to play it. I actually might get it to play some music. So I could... I don't know if you can hear that. I can. It's really upsetting me, but now that I press this, the game starts, this fellow appears, and I press A, and he starts playing horrendous music. Still going. But you can see behind here, anyway, you get the picture. Well, it's best to work through the tutorial, but you can kind of create the scenes, set the background color on start, for example. I might set the background color to nice light blue. And now when the game starts, it will now turn light blue. So you can kind of keep adding features to this. I can add elements to the game using power-ups. I can add more advanced stuff like functions and text and things. So I could make it say, link those two together. Length of hello, I don't know. I don't think that actually works, but there you go. And I can also add my own assets to things as well. So I can keep adding more assets, songs, animations, and things like that to add to my game. So it kind of interacts. But the cool thing is when I create these blocks, it will show me what it looks like in JavaScript behind. So it kind of projects out into more formal coding learning and things like that. So if you're interested, my advice would be go and do the tutorial. Oh, hang on, it's gone. Go and do the tutorial. Because there are little tutorials everywhere. They're completely free. Start tutorial. And it's going to teach me how to make my own game, which is really cool. I'll probably take my son through doing this at some point because he's really keen. He's just turning 7. But it gives it really clear instructions that you could work through as a class or as a small group or something to make your own little game. I dare say you would be extremely well liked if you did that. But anyway, let's move on for now. Sorry, I know those are really exciting. They kind of make me want to not do my work, which is probably not great given that I have work to do. So let's move on for now. So they're all there if you want to check them out, but hopefully that makes it a little more, I guess, real for you, a bit more concrete, less abstract as we move beyond just the theory stuff. It won't fit in every classroom. It won't always be at the forefront of your mind. Obviously English, mathematics, science, those sorts of things are pretty important, but it's nice to have in your back pocket because you never know what particular unique opportunities will emerge in a school. There are other resources there as well if you want to check them out. I mean, it's pretty exhaustive, the list of stuff, so I don't want to bombard you too much more with that. But thank you for indulging me in that, and we will hopefully you will get some time to do some work in tutorials on those topics as well. But I want to return to alternative conceptions for a second, because in a couple of weeks for your second assessment with the 2-page report, you will need to talk about alternative conceptions and how they're addressed within your digital learning resource. So I'm going to briefly rehash what I mean by alternative conceptions because I did talk about them, I think, in week 4 in the theories of learning sort of component. I won't go through the websites and examples, but we'll go I'll show you what they look like in the rubric, and we'll talk about how we'll go and find some scholarly literature. So this is where we start to extend into the academic side of things, and I don't apologise for that. I think that's we should be holding high standards in education, and I see no reason why all of you wouldn't be able to use the academic material out there effectively and efficiently in your assessment tasks. So let's get into it. So we've talked about alternative conceptions. The great quote is that and I think the key term here is that it's an experience-based explanation. So even if the conclusion or the representation is incorrect, there is useful logic and experiences that have gone to constructing that idea of the world. So we don't dismiss them, we use them, we think about them, we adapt them with experience and questioning and investigations and those sorts of things. We help them to see that learning and development is part of the process rather than just learning the correct fact and replacing our incorrect fact. Although that sometimes you just need the facts, but for what we're talking about, this works here as well. So, alternative conception is a better term because we're not kind of adding the label to it, I guess. But there are other terms as well that we call them misconceptions. For our purposes in education, alternative conceptions is more appropriate, I feel, because we're acknowledging that learners are at different stages. And even as adults, we don't have the complete catalogue of scientific information that represents the scientific community to date. That's just completely unreasonable to ask of a K-12 teacher. But they are invaluable to us in education, so we should be thinking about some. And they're really, really interesting. I mean, talk to young children and see what they think about things, and they will give you fascinating ideas. They're sort of the lifeblood of education in many ways because they're not blank slates. So there's some common ones you'll see. The one I talked about previously was that the seasons are caused by the Earth's distance to the sun, that mushrooms are plants and not fungi, and I can see why. They grow from the ground. They do have some similar observable features. The sun moves around the Earth. Well, that makes sense. Physically, it feels like that's the case because it doesn't feel like the Earth's moving. Force and energy are synonymous, which is not true. So that the language can be mixed up a lot, and we will hopefully have done some work in tutorials on that. That's the reason why clarifying language and our use of language in different contexts is such an important part of the 5 E's. It's not to say someone's language is wrong all the time. It's to say, well, in this context, energy means this. In sport, it might mean playing really hard, for example. So there are some websites there. I've actually been through those, so I won't go through those again because we need to go to the scholarly spaces today. Basically, we're operating with the constructivist model, meaning we acknowledge and utilise in our teaching the beliefs and understandings of our students rather than ignoring that and assuming a blank slate. Forget that. These are here if you'd like to go through them. Sorry, I should get all these out of it. There are some really interesting ones here, but they often create these models from observation. Ice has steam coming off it, heavier objects fall faster because that just makes sense, even though they pretty much fall at the same rate in a vacuum, basically. The sun goes around the Earth once a day. Well, that makes sense because that's how we experience day and night. So if we think about these, and often through things like text and media, they can help to reinforce alternative conceptions as well. So the nature of the phases of the moon being created by the differing angle between our perspective, our position in Earth, the relative angle created across the 3 points between Earth, the sun and the moon is what's causing the phases and our perceived changes in the phases. But if you look at storybooks, it looks like the moon is changing. Like you often see drawings of sort of that crescent-shaped moon that can actually cause alternative conceptions if we don't explain them to students clearly. And gravity gets stronger the further away you are because the impact seems stronger even though gravitational force is consistent. Continuing through with these. I want to go through these. Sorry, I need to get those sounds out. They're a product of different time, but if we don't address alternative conceptions, the naive beliefs, whatever you want to call them, that young people hold, they will simply persist into adulthood. There is nothing to say that we become scientifically literate by virtue of ageing. It doesn't happen. It has never happened consistently in human history. And we're at a point of great privilege because we have access, we have experienced, and we are now contributing to high quality education for young people that is an outlier in human history. The vast majority of humans that ever lived were illiterate. And so I think it's important to reflect on that sometimes because it is such a privilege, and we do tend to get inherently focus on the things that trouble us in our lives. That's just the human condition. But 50% of adults believe that spiders and worms are not animals. No idea why that is. Probably a classification error, and their classification skills weren't robustly developed in school. That humans are not animals, that we're somehow different to animals, even though functionally a lot of our core features are the same with regard to respiration, intake of food, reproduction, and phases of life and those sorts of things. Classic one, fire is alive, according to Grant 1994, old reference, but a remarkable one nonetheless. I'd hope that number's dropped, I really would. But given the rise of people's belief in pseudoscientific ideas, which we will also cover, like homeopathy, it's a great number of adults will hold pseudoscientific or unscientific views. Even when I was here, 66% of first-year teachers could not believe that the phases of the moon were caused by the Earth's shadow falling on the moon. And we actually learnt about that through modelling tutorials. We were proven wrong because we couldn't prove ourselves right. And only 9% of Australians knew that the Earth takes 1 year to orbit the sun, which is quite incredible too. I'm not using that to knock anyone. That's not meant to be an elitist claim. You and I, probably both, or all of us, will have similar gaps in our knowledge, and that's okay. But it really strikes at the importance of trying to address these for our students and give them a predilection for lifelong learning, I guess would be the way to put it. So these things are pretty complex. And that's why we need ongoing assessment, because you can't just tell someone the truth in inverted commas and expect them to believe it or fully understand it. Our view is that knowledge doesn't exist outside the mind of a thinking being, and thus each bit of knowledge constructed by a person is slightly different, and there are slightly different interpretations leading to hybrid views. So we want to use the conceptual change model in our classroom. So a quick example of this would be, looking at what causes the phases of the moon. So like I talked about, you could do a diary, you could use an app to simulate it, but you can see, the full moon, what's this one, half moon, waxing gibbous, waxing crescent. God, it's been a few years since I've done it. So you may have heard quite a number of ideas with regard to the moon, for example. It is the shadow of the Earth that stops the sunlight getting to the moon. It is the clouds that do it, will be something that you'll often hear about as well. The amount of light coming from the sun does it, which is interesting. I mean, there is variance with things like sunspots and stuff like that, but not to the consistency that it would change that. And it is the Earth reflecting light to the moon that does it as well, the reflection idea, which is also quite interesting. I guess the ocean is quite reflective. So there's a lot of points to think about here. Now, you can actually do an experiment here where you can use a basketball and a tennis ball and try to make all of the shapes that we would observe with the phases of the moon. People will try to create the phases of the moon by essentially blocking out and creating shadows like an eclipse. But if we look at a time lapse of an eclipse, the shapes are not the same. So simply displaying the time lapse of the eclipse and asking, can we replicate this shape, which in this instance would be the waxing gibbous shape, slightly more than half. And I think that's what it is. So we'll have a quick look here because this is only short. So you can see as we go through, this is a time lapse of an eclipse. So the blocking of either the blocking through the moon blocking the Earth or the Earth blocking the moon type of thing. Solar or lunar, depending on what you think. But you can see, here we go. We're getting the eclipse happening here. And we can see those are not the same shape. The curvature of the line between the light and the darkness is not the same. It's actually inverted. So we can quite safely say that that particular model does not work for the phases of the moon. The blocking idea, whether it be lunar or solar, only works for an eclipse. And an eclipse happens in 4 hours, not an entire month. So there are some facts here that can be presented that effectively disprove the initial ideas here. So that's what we're talking about. So if you look at the timing there, it's a 4-hour period, but to get through a month, if we've done a moon journal in class, it would take us 29.51 days. So the long and short of that is the existing idea that we had, that is one blocking the other, just doesn't work. And that's the conceptual change model. I went through that process as an adult in first year science many years ago. So you can do this with, if you want to show a student this, it's a good opportunity. Get a dark room, a tennis ball, a swivel chair, and a person stands a few metres away from the bright light, holding the tennis ball out, arm stretched with in their fingers, and as they spin on the chair and rotate, they will actually see from their perspective, with a light going on them, the changes in phase. But a person standing away will just see the tennis ball half lit up the whole time. If we're in shoots, I'd show you. But anyway, that's the scientific explanation. So we can take that idea and see the shapes change, and then use that to pivot into once they understand the alternative conception is not appropriate, we can use that to leverage the more scientific language through something like the explain phase, for example. So this would occur in the explain phase. They would be explaining what they're seeing in the modelling, and then we might introduce some of the language, like a crescent moon being 10 to 90 degrees, so less than half, generally speaking. If it's growing, it's called waxing. If it's shrinking, it's waning in the cycle. But anyway, continuing on. So we need to find these out, and we find them out through diagnostic assessment and ongoing investigation, basically, whether it be through modelling or drawing or annotated maps or whatever you can think about. Then, of course, once we take that a step further, once they understand how the phases of the moon are generated, we can start asking them more complex questions. If you see the moon at this time, what day is it, etc., etc. But that must build upon a fundamental understanding of how the phases of the moon occur. So let's return back to assessment 2, because you've, I guess, indulged me in a bit of an adventure there. So let's get back to assessment 2. Seems only fair. So there's this component of the rubric that looks like this, and there are marks on the table here that require you to do a little bit of academic work, and we've tried to make it very clear what that academic work looks like. The issue we've had in the past is that students completely overlook the rubric in creating the assessment task, and they leave marks on the table. And in this subject, we use the rubric to fully unpack different levels of achievement, whereas the task description just outlines the basics. So it's incredibly frustrating for students and markers alike when things are missed just because the time wasn't spent going through the rubric. So let's go through it now. To get a pass for that section of the 2-page report, you should list examples of pupils' alternative scientific conceptions that are related in any way to the content of the digital learning resource. So we will take that view quite broadly because we know it's quite challenging. So listing is simply you dot point, this is what it is. No deeper explanation, no analysis, just there they are. Those are the alternative conceptions. Similar to what we've talked about there. The point about fire being alive, for example, or humans not being animals. And there's an appropriate source. When I say textbook, I'm thinking the Scamp and Preston texts, Teaching Primary Science Constructively, 6th, 7th, if 8th is out edition. They have alternative conceptions within them. You can go to the glossary and find them. So if you want to pass, that'll get you there. If you want to take it a step further, you list and describe examples of pupils' alternative conceptions through scholarly sources. In class, you'd find that out for yourself. But given we're at university and you have no class, this is a great opportunity for you to show us your academic prowess. At this level, the credit level, you provide multiple scholarly references, i.e. the textbook and perhaps a peer-reviewed journal article, as sources for the alternative conceptions. And we will go through that in a second. I'll make it very clear how that works so that the expectations are achievable for everyone. I'm sure a number of you already use these tools extensively, but on the odd off chance you don't, I'll be going through them. At this level, it lists, describes, and discusses examples. So what we mean by discusses is that you take, fully describe, and then you talk about it in relation to your teaching practice, your ideas about teaching and learning, the fit with the 5 V's, whatever it is. How is it relevant to your resource? It's not to say your resource would correct it necessarily if it's diagnostic. If your resource is an engaged phase, it might simply be that these are ideas that you could come across. So there's a bit more nuance. You're providing analysis connecting the alternative conceptions to your resource, saying where it does, it doesn't fit. Okay. Again, provides multiple scholarly references, and multiple means 2 or more. That's it. Don't need to give me 10. Don't need to give me a full journal article. It's only 2 pages. And at an extra level, you make suggestions for how each of these alternative conceptions can be identified in pupils' thinking. Now, this is for the report only. If it makes sense to have it in your resource, absolutely. You can have it in your resource. But if we find it in the report and it makes sense there, you'll get the marks for it. So if you happen to have an elaborate phase and you're thinking, but James, I can't possibly do a diagnostic assessment there, it would make no sense, great. You just note that in the report. So you don't have to completely destroy your resource and make it no longer fit your vision of effective science teaching. At the high distinction level, it's more or less the same. Licks, describes, discusses. So again, kind of discussing these alternative conceptions in relation to what you've designed, what your pedagogical understanding is, what your main focus is with this assessment task. And then you make those suggestions for how they could be identified and strategies for dismantling them. Week 5, we've talked about guide discovery, open discovery. You could use a video. We've just gone through an example with the conceptual change model, where students provide their ideas and then they're challenged to try to prove that their idea fits or someone else's idea doesn't fit. So we've given some examples. It needn't be hugely detailed in explanation. You're not providing us a lesson plan, but if you address those points, you can get yourself very nicely into a distinction, high distinction place. So whether you want the high distinction because that's where your grade point average is and you're coming for my job, or maybe you're just not as comfortable with other aspects of your assessment and would like some easier marks, it can be done. When I say easy, I mean conceptually. These things aren't challenging conceptually, but they do take time and effort, and that's why marks are awarded for those. So there are many terms you can search for if you want to go out and find some alternative conceptions for your report. Alternative conceptions are where we start, but for search terms, we've got all the synonyms here: naive beliefs, alternative frameworks. If you do honours, if any of you want to do honours, let me know, because you can get right into the weeds of doing really robust lit reviews and all sorts of cool things. But for now, I'll give you the basics in Google Scholar. So allow me to bring that up on screen now. Okay, so for those of you that haven't used Google Scholar before, it essentially is a bit of a shotgun style of tool that only deals with academic output, so peer-reviewed scholarly sources, and it's hard to get into peer-reviewed journals. I think the rejection rate for the good journals is 90%, and as an academic, that's kind of the challenge, is the pain that requires all of us to go through. But what that usually means for you as a reader is the information has been peer-reviewed, and it's been peer-reviewed by reviewers and authors that don't know each other. So we've got the right to say, yeah, this is not very good. Don't publish this. So the person behind it doesn't impact it that much. When you go to Google Scholar for the first time, and if you're an old hand at it, please go to the 3 lines in the top left-hand column. Go down to settings down the bottom, which would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 settings. Go to library links, which is the second link down. Type in Charles Sturt University, tick the box and save. And what this does is link Google Scholar to your CSU account. So if we have access to it at CSU, you'll be able to find it through Google Scholar, and you'll save yourself time in needing to go through databases and things like that. So let's say you want to do alternative conceptions for your work. Now you have a couple of options. You could search for alternative conceptions relating to the content area that you're focusing on. So if you're doing something like life cycles, you could type in life cycles, alternative conceptions, primary, elementary science or something. If your area is a bit more abstract, you have a backup here that catches everything, which is alternative conceptions relating to science or the nature of science or science processes or something along those lines. So you can always go back to the more general idea about what they don't understand about science as a process, and you can see what literature's out there. So anything you pick will work, but that's the break glass in case of emergency. What do they not know about science as a discipline, as a way of understanding the world? Many students historically have believed in the literature that science is a body of facts that we are just imparted to them. And it can be that way if that's how it's taught. So yeah, we can look at some of that sort of stuff. So we can do a little search here. We won't make it too tricky, but we'll go alternative. I won't go into any conceptions. Let's just say nature of science. I might even put that in brackets, in quotations. Nature of science, elementary students. I say elementary because that's going to hit America, and America has more researchers. There's more stuff. You could do primary as well. You can use American research. It's fine. If it's not Australian, that's okay. If you're doing year 4 and you find something for year 7, that's okay too, because this is hard. Okay, so just do your best. So we're not going to, sit here and go, and the age of it won't matter either. We just want to see your academic skill and your ability to use that material. Okay, so we're not going to turn around and say to you, hey, this is 5 years out of date. You can't use it. The reason for that is actually a lot of fields sort themselves out and become sort of stable, and then the research no longer gets published. For example, the issues in science education with regard to gender difference are actually now really well ventilated, and it's hard to get published in that sort of space. So let's continue. God, there's so many. I want to check out some of those recommended articles. So we can see here some ideas here. Improving students' conceptions of nature of science, or review. Actually, I should look at that myself. That would be really cool. Okay. Yeah, so what you want to do with this is we don't want pre-service teachers, we want students understanding. So we might look at this one. So have a look and see if anything fits here. A critical review of students and teachers' understandings of the nature of science. That looks pretty good. I've got students in there. If I want to cite that in my report, I can simply click the Cite button and grab that APA reference, and that one actually looks pretty good. I could probably paste that in directly, so that's my tip. Then we just open up the HTML code and just see what it says. And what I would then ask you to do is just read the abstract and just spend some time going through that. You don't need to, at the early stage, go through the whole paper necessarily. If you want to download it, just click Download PDF. But we're just going to have a quick look at this abstract to see if we think it could give a bit of information that's useful for our our 2-page report. So we can see here there is widespread agreement on that an adequate understanding of the nature of science is a critical component. Yes, agree wholeheartedly. The main objective of this review is to analyse articles from 9 main science education journals that consider the teaching of nature of science to K-12 students. Okay, so they reviewed 52 articles. So that this is a review article, so there's quite a lot of information in this. And the main findings were some aspects of the nature of science are easier to learn than others. Okay, well that could be useful actually. So we could say this is an area that's underdeveloped, the idea of tentativeness and social cultural embeddedness, that students do not understand that science is inherently linked to our culture and society. And that some subjective aspects of the nature of science and the scientific measures seem to be difficult for participants to understand. Okay, well that's pretty good. So we could take some of this information. I think we could use this to write some sentences in our report. So we could, for example, say here, if we were going to put this into our report, we could write this up by saying, according to Coffray and others, bracket 2019, in a review of 52 studies, they found that elementary students often struggle with the idea of tentativeness in science and social and cultural embeddedness. So in my report, in my resource, I've incorporated this idea of fallibility by talking about why we repeat investigations, and that science is about proving ourselves to be wrong and seeing which is not proven wrong. So you could, in terms of your work, you could simply add a question or a prompt somewhere that addresses that. Or it could just go in the report. So we just write this up with our own words and own understanding. Or you might not like that particular article and decide, let's try a different one. So you might, for example, go alternative conceptions, elementary students. We'll just add in the classic life cycles. Actually, I kind of want to keep that because I think I want to look at that in my own time. So let's just go alternative conceptions, life cycles, elementary students. Nothing too fancy. And we can see some ones here. Elementary students' understanding of life cycles by Nyberg and others. So that one looks pretty good. I'd like to know what they understand of it. And it's the same story here. If I want to cite that, I just go here. And I've got my citation. It's probably not entirely accurate, but it's enough to get me started. And then I can go and have a look at the abstract. Or is this in a whole thing? Oh, this is, I've got to go to... here's my suggestion. Control F and use that to get yourself around. Nyberg is on page 27. And here we are on page 27. So as part of a research program addressing the design and evaluation of teaching sequences in science, we are developing a teaching sequence concerning life cycles for students in 1 to 5. Okay, let's get some of the results. The students' understanding of life cycles was assessed using a pre-test before teaching and a post-test. Analyses of students' answers indicate that learning of a specific life cycle might not be problematic provided that the child has been given the opportunity to observe and discuss about it. However, analyses also indicate the link between one generation and the next is complicated, i.e. notions of reproduction and fertilisation when it is a question of sexual reproduction. The aspect of life cycles needs to be developed within our program. So the idea of variance in living things and sexual reproduction is an issue that they don't understand. It might not even apply to us directly in our curriculum because this is, of course, a different, what have we got here? There's Swedish context, but that shows us some area of misunderstanding alternative conceptions there as well that we could use. But anyway, those are just a couple of examples. We could write that up, put the citation in, add a sentence or two, and we'd be on our way, hopefully, to better marks in EMS207 and have shown some good academic skill along the way. So what are we at now? 51 minutes. So thank you for indulging me in this particular lecture. Hopefully you've gotten something useful for your long-term teaching aspiration and for the assessment as well. In terms of weekly preparation, complete any task set by your tutor, lecturer, subject coordinator as a first order priority. Of course, bring your tablets and laptops to the class when you can, because we do want to get into this digital space as much as we can. And you can read from module 4, 4.1. The reading will now decline significantly in the lead up to the end of the semester. And that's it for me this week, and I will catch you all for the next one.